My name is Dr. Cara Van Dam, and I'm the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences here at University of Maryland Global Campus. And I'm very pleased to have our second installation of our webinar series, Navigating the Future, where we look at various areas of our society and the ways in which COVID-19 is making an impact, not just in the present, but likely in the future. And today we're going to be talking about vaccines, what they are, why we need them, and how they are going to help us with the fight against COVID-19. It gives me great pleasure to be joined today by Dr. Jim Coker. Jim is our department chair for our sciences department here at UMGC, and previously was our chair of our biotechnology program in the graduate school. Dr. Coker holds a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology, I was close, from the Pennsylvania State University, and he is here to share his insights and knowledge and thoughts. So thank you, Jim, so much for joining me for this, and let's go ahead and dig in.
Sounds great. Thanks. I'm happy to be here, Cara.
Great. So, I think many lay people like myself think of vaccines as really sort of a 20th century phenomenon, but you note that their history goes back a lot farther than that. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of vaccination and why vaccines are so important to address public health crises like this?
Sure, absolutely. So the first vaccine was developed against smallpox. And the vaccine was developed in the late 1700s, 1798, if you want to be exact about it. And within 5 to 10 years after that, it was actually being widely used both in the US by doctors and also by Napoleon to vaccinate his army. But actually, even before the late 1700s, there was a process that was widely used in both India and China, where, if we're going to talk about smallpox specifically, where the pus from these pustules, from the pox, would actually be sort of taken off of somebody and smeared on a healthy person. And they found that when they did that, the death rate went down from 20 to 30% if you got it naturally, all the way down to about 2%. So it didn't necessarily work for everybody, but they were able to cut the death rate by 10%. And that was happening, in the 10th century. So vaccines have been with us for a really long time, and ever since they've been a part of public health, they've been a really strong weapon that public health people can use in order to help the general public. So the second part of your question is about sort of why vaccines. And so they're important because they help build the immunity against a certain disease, really. And so the more people that have immunity, the fewer people there will be to spread the disease. So it's pretty sort of simple about why they're important. They're important because they raise the level of immunity in the population.
Excellent, thank you. So one of the looming challenges in the future, it seems, once there are vaccines available, is going to be convincing the general public that the vaccines are safe. So can you talk a little bit about how, as scientists, you scientifically know a vaccine is safe?
Sure, that's a great and really important question to answer. So before any vaccine is ever given to people, the Food and Drug Administration oversees really extensive testing that's being done in companies. And so all of this basically starts within a company, and it starts with tests that go on in the lab, and then eventually move on to being tested in people. And so the tests in people, if we're going to talk about that specifically, are done in 3 phases, where you look at both the safety, the effectiveness, and then also the safety and effectiveness together in sort of a larger group of people. And so those are, if you ever hear about phases of trials, those are the 3 phases of trials. And so the scientists are looking for not only if something works, but also if there are side effects, because it's not good enough for it to work. It also has to work and then not cause significant harm to anybody. So once all of these phases and these tests are done, the data is submitted to FDA, and there are scientists and there are statisticians and a whole group of people there that then sort of independently look at all of this information. And it's only after the fact that they're satisfied is the vaccine actually approved to be marketed in the United States. And then on top of all of that, we're going to bring in the CDC and the Department of Health and Human Services, and there's an independent board called the Advisory Committee on Immunization that sort of looks at everything that went to FDA and all of that data, takes another look at it, and develops recommendations for the CDC, so the CDC can then say, this is what we recommend happens as far as the vaccination goes. So then that's a normal vaccine, right? And that's what a normal vaccine has to go through, which is a very multi-step process, right? So then if we're specifically talking about COVID and the potential vaccine for that, there are more things on top of all of that. And so on top of these normal safeguards that happen, all of the companies that are involved in potentially developing a vaccine have signed a pledge saying, we ourselves, in addition to the FDA, ensure that scientifically everything will be sound before we actually market it to the public. And then on top of that, even a man named Peter Marks, who most people in the general public probably don't know, but he's the director for the particular part of FDA that oversees vaccines, has personally pledged to the American public that he will resign if he feels in any way that a vaccine has been rushed to market.
Well, that's a lot of layers. that is.
Yep.
It's heartening. It's heartening. So as we sit and have this conversation today, you know, we're at the start of October, and so I hope that people will be watching these recordings for some time. But just to sort of time box us where we're at today, at the start of October.
Sure.
Where are we at in the quest for a COVID-19 vaccine? And I know it's actually SARS-CoV-2, I think is the official name of the virus, but where are we at right now?
Yeah, so it's a little bit like HIV and AIDS, right? So you've got COVID, which is the disease, and then the virus underneath is the SARS-CoV-2, right? So I'm gonna focus my comments on the U.S. Specifically. So in the United States, there are 4 potential vaccines that are the furthest along, and all 4 of those happen to be in phase 3. So as I mentioned earlier, phase 3 is the last phase of the human trials before they go to FDA to get approved. So each one of these 4 potential vaccines are being done in partnerships. So the first one is a partnership between a company called Moderna and the National Institute of Health. The second one is the University of Oxford and AstraZeneca. And the third one is Pfizer and a company called BioNTech. And the third one is a company called Janssen, which is a subsidiary of J&J. And then we've also got a local company, local being Maryland, called Novavax. And so all these companies are currently actively recruiting people into trials, and they're recruiting people all throughout the world. And so since they're in phase 3, they want to have a lot of people, and a lot of people in this case means 30,000 people. And then so the question becomes, why 30,000? Because you want a large number of people as possible. So at the end of your trial, you can say we've sort of picked people from as many groups as possible to see how the virus affects that group of people. So if I remember right, the other question you asked was, you know, when are we going to get a vaccine? And that's a little trickier to answer, just because first we need to understand the fact that if something gets approved by FDA, that's very different from having the hundreds of millions or billions of different vials of vaccine that are needed in order to inoculate people. So those are 2 completely different things. So if we're talking about something getting approved by FDA, I think it's, given the current set of circumstances, it's very reasonable to expect that there will be something approved before the end of this year, so 2020. But then if we're talking about having enough doses of vaccine to be able to give to people, that probably won't happen until the middle of next year, so the middle of 2021, or maybe a little bit later than that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And one of the things as we get further down in the vaccine trials that certainly I've been thinking a lot about lately is just the logistical complexity of distribution and delivery, because it isn't, to your point, just about having a vaccine. And one of the things that I was reading recently about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is one of the advantages it has over some of the others that are in phase 3 trials is that it's a single dose vaccine, and it doesn't have to be stored at as cold a temperature to maintain its viability, which will make it easier to distribute more broadly. And I was thinking again also about some of the other vaccines that we've had for other diseases in the past, such as the polio vaccine, which in some places they actually were having outbreaks of polio decades after the vaccine was available. So I'm thinking specifically about in Albania in 1996, there was a polio outbreak, and it was really caused by the lack of electricity, consistent electricity, and that polio vaccine has to be kept cold. And if you don't have electricity, you really struggle with refrigeration. So I guess I was wondering if you might comment a little bit further on some of the logistical challenges just of delivery and distribution.
Sure. I mean, delivery and distribution are 2 huge hurdles, right? So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to need hundreds of millions, probably billions of doses of this vaccine. And so making that many units of something itself is a logistical hurdle. And then when we think about the fact that this is a pandemic and we all want it to end as soon as possible, getting those made as quickly as possible probably means commandeering bioreactors from a lot of different companies in order to make that happen. And the federal government has already started to sort of put out feelers and start to talk to biotech companies to basically say, look, as soon as we get something that's developed, we're going to commandeer your stuff and basically take it over to grow this stuff up as fast as possible. So that's one level of hurdle, right, is the sort of engineering of all of this. Another level is getting it out to people. So you talked about Albania, and talked about sort of the supply of electricity to places, rural places. That unfortunately is still a true thing today, right? There are a lot of countries where electricity is not a given 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Blackouts are very common if there's even electricity at all, right? So having that available places is still a big hurdle. Getting stuff out to the entire globe is a big hurdle. And also sort of this, some people think of it as a policy decision, but who gets this first, right? So when you start growing it up, things are going to start to come out. And we want this to end as soon as possible, so starting to vaccinate people as soon as possible is also a thing. So who gets it first? Is it the elderly? Is it first responders? Is it emergency workers? So there's just a whole host of policy and logistical questions that need to be sort of answered, as well as these sort of more, mundane, like, is there electricity and is there a refrigerator someplace to save this vaccine to give to people type of questions too.
Well, I know a lot of this, it's overwhelming as we think about what the future many months will be, and really years, as we try to get a handle of this. But to hopefully end on a slightly maybe optimistic note, as you look at the scene, as a biologist, as a microbiologist, what are you optimistic about?
Sure. So this is going to sound corny, probably, but I'm optimistic about us, human beings, right? So we're really smart. I know sometimes and some days it doesn't seem like we're very smart, but we actually are pretty smart. And we've been able to outsmart the worst diseases that we've faced thus far. And I have every reason to believe that we're going to be able to do it in the future as well.
Well, I want to thank you again, Dr. Coker, Jim, for a great conversation. Yep. I really appreciated it, and I learned a lot. And I hope all of you will continue to tune in for these webinars. We're holding them every couple of weeks, and we will be continuing through the fall and into the spring with a whole wide array of topics that I think you will find interesting. So thank you again, Jim, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everybody.